Welcome to the Lorecast. I'm Dr. Craig Chalkwist, and we're looking at the stories by which we deeply live. What does it mean to be an American? There are many ways to answer that question, demographically, scientifically, but I suspect that a fully meaningful answer to that question has to come from a story. What is our story here? What story are we actually living here between these shores? It's been said plenty of times that in the past, the stories that answered questions like that were myths. Not myth as superstition, but myth as a sort of storied worldview that could give us a sense of who we are, where we belong, what we're doing here, our place in the cosmos. And the idea is, of course, in our time, that myths have given way to things like science and other disciplines. But we still need myth to answer some of these big questions. And in the case of the United States, if we don't have a conscious myth, or mythology more accurately, about all those interesting problems of how to be here and who we are and who we interact with, we get our mythology by default. And that's the way myth always works. It shows up unexpectedly if we don't pay conscious heed to these collective stories. And then the golden calf shows up later as the bronze bull of Wall Street. The golem reappears as artificial intelligence. Angels turn into UFOs. And the SAT exam reflects hungry Saturn, Saturn, the god who ate his children. So we need myth to make sense of what's happening. And so I'm proposing that what we need here is a new American mythology. And I'd like to talk about what might go into it to make it viable. The old American mythologies are pretty much dreamed out. Of course, the very old ones, the original ones, are still viable because they've been fed and they've evolved among tribal peoples for time out of mind. I'm referring to the mythologies that began with colonization by Europeans. And if we gave a title to their mythology, it might be one like American Exceptionalism or We Conquer All or something like that. It's a very childlike mythology, and in fact, I'm not sure it even deserves to be called a mythology because long ago it was collapsed into an ideology. An ideology is kind of a myth that has turned into a zombie and it walks around eating people. In the case of the American colonists, they were attacking indigenous peoples and even Canada before there was a republic. That's how aggressive they were. And of course, slavery. So that was never really a workable mythology to begin with. A more contemporary one that's less at the infantile childhood level and more at the adolescent level is the purely critical one that says all of this, the whole American enterprise was based on hypocrisy and violence. We should throw it all out and start over. None of it's worth anything. And in fact, that kind of criticality is really a great runway for extremism. You go around and you destroy everybody's precious national stories, and it really leaves lots of room for some bully to come in and say, I am the chosen one, I am the answer, just follow me. So that's not going to be a workable alternative. It seems to me that what we need is a story that's large enough to hold all of it, including the ugly truths and the shadows about where we came from as a country, and yet point us toward repair, toward inclusivity, regeneration, the better angels of our nature, as Lincoln put it once. And so a big story, a national epic, a collective dreaming, in other words, a myth, I think might come in actually very handy right now and be quite practical. As Leslie Marmon Silko put it, we are all part of the old stories. Whether we know the stories or not, the old stories know about us. And when I'm tempted on cynical days to just dismiss it all as hypocritical, violent nonsense, I remember a Gnostic image from their folklore in which the evil demiurge who creates the world accidentally blows a spark of wisdom into Adam, who becomes mightier than the demiurge. Sometimes truly good things can come from low and even dark beginnings. Now, first of all, a mythology needs a setting. And so our setting, of course, is here between the shores, between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And one thing to notice about this land is the incredible variety and diversity that's here. So many different microclimates, so many different kinds of earth, rock, water. A comment that people often make when they visit here for the first time is that the sheer variety and expanse of the country just leaves them in awe. It's a worthy setting for the redreaming of a national epic or a national mythology. And this diversity of climates and landscapes is directly related to the diversity of its people. There have been recent political attempts to say that diversity is somehow a bad thing. But how can that be? The very cosmos depends on diversity. Different forces, different voices, varieties, marvelous varieties everywhere. And diversity is the axis, the foundation of the country itself. E pluribus unum, remember that? Out of many one. Diversity is where the incredible plenitude and variety of the land, the richness of the land, meet the same in the people who live here. That is the very essence of America. Anything that attacks those diversities is by definition un-American in terms of the essence of what we really are, the core of our national identity. So a news story would have to recognize that and put that first. A good story needs more than one plot line. A key one in the past has been conquest of others. But today, the frontier is us. The frontier is the American heart. And it's not to be conquered. It's to be felt into. It's to be revitalized and healed. The journey this time is to ourselves. Now, many mythologies, many myths also have gods, and the U.S. is a land of many gods. One way of holding it is that they're all reflections of the divine with a capital D. But in any case, 2 points about this. One is the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Period. We could think about Paul Tillich in this connection, talking about faith as an ultimate concern. Belief doesn't enter into it, and in fact, beliefs divide. Faith is a different matter, at least according to Tillich. A good myth needs heroes and heroines. And we've got plenty of those, and a very diverse lot, too. Not just, Washington and Jefferson and all those people taught in the schools, but many others as well, increasingly taught in the schools. We've got Crazy Horse fighting settlers in the Black Hills. We've got Sojourner Truth speaking her truth. We've got Annie Oakley. We've got a bunch of people here, all different, sometimes in disagreement, all showing us in many ways at our best and occasionally at our worst. Figures larger than life, because they symbolize the conflicts of life itself. We've also got heroines and heroes waiting to join the lists of public awareness. Sometimes you hear about them, sometimes you don't. We've got Phyllis Wheatley, the poet, for instance. Many of us have heard of Crispus Attucks, the first man to die in the Revolution. We've got Colonel Ty and Salem Poor and so many others. They're stories worthy of weaving into a national epic. Now, many mythologies start with a creation story or a whole set of them somehow. We've got more than one, too. We've got the creation stories of the original people as a foundation for all the others. And keep in mind, too, that creation stories, for instance, the founding of the nation itself, They have a lot of conflict in them oftentimes. If you think of those old Greek creation myths, everybody fighting with everybody else, and but also sowing the seeds of something that's grown later by many hands. Now, a key agenda, a key fantasy or goal of the creation of the American government was that it be an arena of controlled argumentation. And if you read the letters of the founders, you see that. You see it in the articles they wrote. They were constantly disagreeing with each other. But you do it to find common ground, which includes the ground itself, according to Emerson. And so, one example of this that I particularly like is the conflict between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, whose position on slavery and other matters gradually evolved thanks to Douglass's incessant public prodding. And of course, correcting part of the story here, it wasn't Lincoln who set the slaves free, it was black people who set themselves free. Lincoln helped, thanks to Frederick Douglass. Now, there's so many other creations going on in this country all the time. There's the Mohawk ironworkers building New York skyscrapers. They were called skywalkers, familiar word to some of us. They also built the Empire State Building. There is the White House, the Capitol, Mount Vernon, Monticello, the Smithsonian Institute, Wall Street, Harvard Law School, Fort Sumter, and other landmarks built by slaves. There is the Transcontinental Railroad built with Chinese immigrant labor. There are other creations, the Freedom Trail in Boston Common, the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park, Watts Towers, the African Burial Ground National Monument in New York, the Golden Gate Bridge, Taos Pueblo, Statue of Liberty. So many creations. So many examples of Americans working together, even under dire and unjust circumstances. Another thing to realize, too, is that in many myths, the characters are often fluid. They're like Loki, who changes gender or even sex at will. And there's also plenty of tricksters. There's Brer Rabbit, there's Aunt Nancy, there's Coyote, and others in folklore. There's the Boston Tea Party itself, which was the real beginning of the American Revolution, an act of tricksters in a trickster town. I visited Boston this year. I love Boston. It's so Prometheus. Never know what's going to be created there. Some myths are set to music. We've got plenty here. Beyond a few familiar national songs, our music is highly diverse. We've got prominent animals that show up: eagle, coyote, crow, rabbit, and others. And we've got pageants. They're sometimes called holidays, but if we reimagine them mythically, they're actually pageants. Not only July 4th, but Earth Day, LGBTQ Families Day, Black History Month, the Day of the Dead, Chinese New Year. Take your pick. To myth belongs ritual. And in the center of all this is not just white males or white people, which is the position that we're used to having, those of us who grew up conditioned to, but a vision of how things could be here at the center. New creations to be brought about by all of us, not just a single group of us. It's never been a single group of us. And to other white people who feel some insecurity and even anger at losing the privilege of always being in the center of the story, I would say this. Sometimes it's more fun to be at the edge. Sometimes it's better to be part of the band and not always having to lead it. Especially when all the other band members are looking at you and thinking, well, how convenient for him that he put himself in charge of all of this. Where would he be without us? What if the real leader is our visions of where we could go next together? And instead of American exceptionalism, which is basically just group narcissism, what about thinking of our unique role in the world as a mature, finally, reimagination of people who are not better than anybody else, but an experiment in how to live with each other and to live with the land that we've so brutalized. We could be a lesson to the world in how old wounds are healed and made right. Maybe that's our destiny. To a vital mythology belongs symbols, emblems, and one of the ones I would mention here is the Liberty Bell. I wrote a rather long blog. It's at my website, chalquist.com, and it's called Let's Repair the Liberty Bell. And I imagined the crack in the bell, which has been there since the beginning, as the crack in the national soul. The splits that keep us divided from one another. That's what we need to heal, more than anything else. Myths sometimes include charters. My blog includes an initial attempt at what I call a declaration of interdependency, of togetherness, to supplement the original Declaration of Independence. Article number 1 of the Declaration of Interdependency is unity in diversity. Let's see where all that can go. There's an instructive lesson here, too, from Norse mythology, which, of course, is full of battle and conflict. And there is a constant othering going on where the gods, the Aesir, are fighting against different people, the frost giants, the fire giants, a lot of others. And they always have to have enemies, which is the hallmark of an unstable group, always having to have scapegoats. That's how you can tell a group is toxic and pathological. They're always against somebody else. Not in terms of justice, but to attack. They're against people, not actions, not harmful actions. And so, in Norse mythology, what this leads to is Ragnarok. Ragnarok. In other words, the end of the world. The battle in which the gods themselves perish. Maybe the lesson there is that a group doesn't survive and flourish by being against other groups and other people. It does have to defend itself against attackers outside and inside, but that's not what I mean. I mean scapegoating. So we can have groups based on strength rather than the weakness of othering as part of our own healing of the crack in the Liberty Bell. And if we really took that on, perhaps we could actually complete an unfinished revolution. As John Adams wrote to Richard Price in 1786, the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the drama is closed. I would say that's also true of American emotional maturity. Around the world, oftentimes, we have been loose cannons at best and highly destructive at worst. We have done things we need to apologize for and need to make right. An essential piece of the maturity that we have to pursue if we're going to show up in the world as fully adult members of the international community. We have to stop being like little boys who say, "Mom, I didn't break it. Jimmy broke it." No, we broke it. And we need to try to fix it. And if we can't fix it, at least make amends. Maybe that should be a national pageant too, a national holiday. A day of our own atonement. And of course, alongside all that, are the things that we occasionally get right, where justice is actually done, where we bring new good things into the world, open up new possibilities. That too is a fundamental part of the American character. Speaking of which, we also need to have a national conversation on the casual use of that word American, but that's another broadcast. Which America? There's North, Central. In any case, here in the United States, there are opportunities at hand that we should finally step up to. in this unfinished revolution we have going on. So nothing but the first act of the drama is closed, said John Adams. Let's write the second act together. Thank you.